Okay, well, hello Jasmine, hello Sindru, and hello Cloud. So again, so that I can take attendance, all of you who are here, just say hi. Hello Sherwin, hello Clarence, hello Winning. So that's six of you, six people watching right now. We'll wait for the others. Hello Kunza. Hey, 1, 2, 3, 6. Hello Ray. Hello Laiba, hello Otien. Okay, 11 people now. See, level 3 all starting to act cool already. Oh, I'm too cool. I'm not gonna be as responsive. Why? Because I'm level 3. Oh yeah, I'm better than level 2 or level 1. Okay, let's wait for the rest. I see 11 people are viewing right now. I got Jasmine, Sindru, Cloud, Sherwin, Clarence, Winning, Ray, Kunze, Laiba, Otien. Hello Cheryl, hello Yasmin, hello Renu. Okay, 12 people watching now. Still waiting for a few more. Chin. Cheryl, just let me know again whether or not you and your sister are watching this together. Naomi doesn't take econs. Ray is here. Padma doesn't take econs. Okay, well, we're mostly here. Okay, we can begin now. All right, hello all. Today we're gonna wrong one. We're gonna go into chapter 21, standards of living. So those of you who have your textbooks, please make your way there. Page 226 of the or the previous version of the harder textbook. Yeah, page 226 on this one. If you're using the new textbook, I think like Jasmine, then you can go to the appropriate page. The book is behind me, but yeah, I'm sure you can find it yourself. All right, Shireen is with Cheryl. Okay, well done. All right, so we're going to talk about standards of living, and well, I think you guys have got a pretty good idea already, given the kinds of questions that we have done in our past year papers, but we'll just go through this, okay? Now, before we get to the textbook, I just want to show you some news articles about what's happening in the world right now, okay? And feel free to, if you've got another device, feel free to Google as well and see what's going on out there, okay? Let me just show you what's going on. All right, so if we look at, okay, so I'm just Googling emerging markets and we'll study them in a bit. And you look at the kind of Bloomberg is a news source that I am very much a fan of, okay? Okay, so you look at these kinds of headlines on April 12th, just over the weekend. Rally in need of help. Emerging markets look for salvation, right? Emerging markets are peering over the precipice. Right, downgrades, right? So Wall Street veterans shun emerging markets, okay? Well, this guy is bullish on emerging markets, but everything else, fastest collapse in a generation. These are the kinds of headlines that point to the kind of risks and the dire or dark outlook that's facing emerging markets. Why is this of interest to us? Well, because we are here in Malaysia, and Malaysia is an emerging market. Now, emerging markets, we'll study more of that in a bit, but just so you know, broadly speaking, emerging markets are going through a very trying time right now. Just look at the news, look for emerging markets, and you get an idea of what's going on out there, okay? I think this one's pretty interesting. Well, this was earlier this month in April, but since then things have gotten a little bit better. But yeah, you know, you can see, right, first quarter, I don't know if you can see, it might be a bit small, but first quarter saw the worst bond rout in 2 decades. So that means in 20 years, what we are seeing in the first quarter of this year, January through March, worst sell-off. So foreign investors were selling off emerging market bonds, okay? Don't worry about what bonds are, but basically they don't like the bonds coming out of emerging markets, okay? So that's the idea. So that's what's going on in the emerging market space right now, okay? So before we get into what emerging markets are, a quick recap on chapter 20 and chapter 21. All right, so we have spoken about you know, the ways to measure the standard of living. All right, so let's pull this up. Okay, so we have a GDP. Okay, I'm going to call on Cheryl because Cheryl's the first name I see. So Cheryl, go ahead and type out the formula for calculating GDP, okay, in the comments. All right, so Cheryl, type out the formula for GDP in the comments. Sure, you can refer to the textbook if you have to. I can't stop you anyways. But this is just a reminder, right? So this is a way of measuring or using as an indicator of the standards of living for people in that country or economy. So first thing we look at is GDP, gross domestic product. Okay, so it's the value of all the goods and services produced within the borders during a certain period of time. That's the definition, right? If you guys need a refresher, please go back to page 216. Right? GDP measures the monetary value of goods and services produced within a country for a given period of time. I know you guys are bored anyway, so this Friday, look out for China's first quarter GDP. It's coming out this Friday, which is the 17th of April. Right? Everyone's going to be watching this very closely because, as we all know, after Chinese New Year, then China went into a lockdown. And so for most of the second quarter, their economic activity was shut down and hit very drastically. So we want to find out how much that translated into their headline GDP. How do we calculate GDP? I'm still waiting for the formula from Cheryl. Unless if Cheryl, you do not have a textbook, then let me know in the comments and I'll have someone else type in the formula. All right, so that's GDP. And then you got gross national income. Now, the definition for gross national income is on page 226. That's the new chapter we're studying today, chapter 21. Okay, so it's very easy. So remember the definition of GDP is the monetary value of all goods and services produced within the country, right? Keyword being within that country. Okay, GNI, you take GDP plus, you see the definition there, plus the net income from the assets that you have abroad. Okay, so say many economies or many governments, they also use money that they generate from within the economy to invest in overseas projects. Okay, it can be building highways, hospitals, or just investment in stocks, whatever. Okay, so GNI is a broader definition. You take GDP plus the net investment. Sorry, net income meanings. Obviously, you send some money overseas to invest in that particular project or that particular stock, whatever investment that is, right? Then minus the money coming back in, or like the profits that you gain. Okay, income. Okay, so you take that difference, you add that to GDP, and you get GNI. Okay, yeah, I mean, it's good to know because sometimes the IGCSEs do talk about GNI. It doesn't really get into the weeds so much, but it's good to have an overview, at least know the definition. Okay, thank you very much, Cheryl, for the formula for C plus M. Okay, yeah, X minus M, yeah. So X minus M equals to net exports, yeah. Okay, so well done there, Cheryl. So if you guys need a refresher and you do not have a textbook, the formula for calculating GDP is in the comments, which Cheryl has kindly provided. So look out for China's first quarter GDP coming out this Friday. It's a big one, right? Because China is the world's second largest economy. Many countries like Malaysia are reliant on how much growth there is in China. So that's a good barometer or good signal for how the global economy fared in the first quarter of this year, January through March. Okay, so we got GDP and GNI. So those two, GDP and GNI, you can divide it down to per capita. All right, so remember, per capita means per head. Okay, so for example, the GDP of Malaysia and the GDP of Singapore, at least in recent years, have been pretty much similar. But why do we see Singapore as a richer country? Because if you boil it down to GDP per capita, right, they've got about what was it, like 5, 6, 7 million people there. Your whole GDP of the country, you divide it by 7 million people, it's a lot more per capita, per head, as opposed to the Similar size GDP of Malaysia, which is same to Singapore, but you have to divide it by 32 or 33 million Malaysians, right? So the GDP per capita in Malaysia is lower than the GDP per capita for Singapore, right? That's why we see Singapore is having a higher living standard, higher quality of life. They are seen as richer, okay? All right, then HDI, we've spoken about that in a previous chapter as well. It's contained in, it spills over into chapter 21 as well. That's the Human Development Index. So it takes into account healthcare, education, all that stuff. Okay, but remember the criticisms, of HDI. It's on page 223 in chapter 20, and then repeated again on page 228 in chapter 21. All right, so and also look at the criticisms at the top of page 228. All right, so so those three components, so life expectancy, education, and income, well, that's not enough. There are other factors as well. What about freedom of speech? What about the environmental factors? What about cultural capital, right? All these things can affect our life chances and our quality of life as well, but those are not factored into the HDI. And then, of course, income inequalities as well, right? Is it fair that, fine, you measure income levels, but then the rich are like super rich and the poor are super poor, right? And these concepts, right, I know it's all textbooks right now, and you might not relate to it, but just know this, all that we're studying right now is being tested out there in the real world, right? Think about it. You and I, we are both living in the comfort of our home. We don't have to question where our next meal comes from. Electricity, switch on the aircon, bam, it's there, right? We can do this class online. We know that our monthly bills for the internet are all taken care of, right? Easy peasy, right? But for those, in the past we would call them working poor. Well, actually now also, if they still have jobs, working poor, that means they live on a day-to-day basis, or sometimes on a week-to-week or month-to-month basis, but they live from paycheck to paycheck. So if their next paycheck doesn't come in, right, then they're stuck. They don't have income to sustain them for that period. They need that income on a regular basis as long as they can keep working to pay for all these bills. Well, now that you have a government mandated by law shutdown where you are not allowed to leave your homes, what happens then, right? So now there's a lot of talk of, we don't know because everyone's still stuck at home, can't really do these kinds of surveys, but I'm sure there are many of these working poor who have now become non-working poor, right? So you see that disparity. While many of us are enjoying life, take picture, Instagram, check out my meal for this day, I can order Grab food, no problem, I don't even think about the cost, right? And we still have our savings, we're already thinking ahead. What about college? What about school when we come back to school? So all those plans are still intact. It's not disrupted. Our survival and our future plans, our future well-being are not disrupted by this coronavirus. But there are many, many people who are being put at risk. Right? So how do you take into account all these factors? They are very survival, right, into the HDI, GDP, GNI. Okay, and we've seen those headlines that I showed you earlier, right? Emerging markets are at risk. Well, what does that mean for their survival, right? So all these things we'll try and contemplate over the course of this chapter. Okay, and hopefully, like I said, I hope that by studying the arts, economics, business studies, sociology, you guys have a broader perspective. Now is a great time to just really broaden your horizons. Granted, you cannot go out there and see it with your own physical eyes, but Google it, right? See through the virtual world what's really happening around us. Okay, even right downstairs here, right outside of VisiTutor. Okay, we're seeing it. The lines at OTK used to be a lot longer. It used to wrap around the whole building. Nowadays, now that the MCO is extended, the lines are a lot shorter now. Why? So from an economics perspective, potentially is those people, their savings are dwindling. They initially expected savings to hold for 2 weeks, then 4 weeks, now it's 6 weeks, right? So their savings have to stretch it out. So they cannot pay for as much stuff, goods and services anymore. Potentially, I don't know. Or maybe they're just bored with just cooking at home and they're ordering more Grab food. I don't know. I hope it's more of the latter more than the former. That being they're running out of money to sustain themselves, and that's why the queues at OTK are a lot shorter now, a lot shorter. In the past, when the MCO first started, I had to wait about half an hour, easy, right? Half an hour to get into the building. Now I look, I can be in within 5 minutes, maybe 10 at max, right? Because the line's a lot shorter. Okay, so so all these ways are just measures and indicators of living standards. But again, we know the criticism. GDP, it doesn't, just because you got a high GDP doesn't mean people are happier, doesn't mean they're well off. HDI, you got other components that are missing as well. Okay, so just have a broad overview of what each of these indicators mean. It doesn't mean that they're perfect, but at the same time, because they are imperfect, it still does not mean that they are not useful. Each of them are useful. Okay, they're still useful. Okay, all right. So with that said, let's look at page 226. Let's go back to page 226. So let's talk about developed economies versus developing economies. Okay, so like I mentioned, Malaysia is a developing economy. Long story short, developed economies, I mean, to give you the simplest and the broadest answer, it's not perfect, but developed just means richer. Okay? Developing means poorer, or they're trying to become richer. Okay? Developed means they're rich already. Okay? By some of these definitions, and we'll get there in a bit. Okay? So just know that there's this contrast there. But then, if you look at, say, how some countries, okay, like Malaysia, for example, even though we are not exactly a rich country, yet our healthcare system is able to take care of those affected by the coronavirus much better than rich countries, right? Rich countries like Italy, UK, US, all their hospitals are struggling, right? I mean, Malaysia, it's the hospitals, the medical system is being tested, but we're certainly faring a lot better than the rich countries. Okay, so what does it all really mean, right? So all these definitions are being tested right now, even as we speak. Okay, but here's the some of the characteristics for well, if I can pull that up. Okay, characteristics of developing countries. Now this is a bit small, but hopefully you guys can still see this. Okay. Can you guys see this? Let me see if I can make this slightly bigger. No, I can't. After that, it's huge already. Let me know in the comments if you guys can see this. Is that better? Oh, that's slightly better. Oop. Oop, too much. Okay, let's go back here. All right. So we saw those headlines earlier about developing countries. Well, what are developing countries? Well, they have got a low GDP per capita. Okay, now there is a definition for, I'll just pull this up, World Bank threshold for developed nation status, GDP per capita. Okay, it's about, hold on. Okay, well, GNI is $12,000. High income nation, okay, so they're using GNI, right, per capita of $12,376, okay, at least as of 2018, okay. Malaysia's one is not quite, we have been getting close, but I think it's about 9 or 10,000. Let me see. Okay, Malaysia GNI per capita. No, that's purchasing dollars. So Malaysia's GNI, okay, about 10,000. Yeah, so I remember that, about 10,000. Let me see what we have in news. So 47,000. That's about about 10 plus thousand ringgit. Okay. Okay, reach high, okay. So 10,000. Okay, you guys can see this. Let me try and, oh, dang it. Oh, it's too much. Where did it go? Yeah, there we go. Okay, so Malaysia's GNI was about 10,000. Okay, so we are not quite there at the World Bank threshold that we saw earlier of 12,300 plus. Okay, we are on our way there. We're getting there. Okay, so as things stand by this definition, we are still a developing economy. Okay, not quite a developed economy yet, developing. So obviously, this story was back in what? Yeah, 2019 last year. So about a year ago, May last year. So the goal was to get our GNI up to this, which by today's 12 times 4, 48. Nah, still below developed nation status. Because right now, you need about 4.3. Yeah, so you need about 48 to 50,000 ringgit. Okay, for GNI to hit the developed nation status. Well, that was the goal for this year, but obviously with the coronavirus, everything's gone to the wayside. So we might have to wait a few more years before we can hit the World Bank's definition of being a high-income economy. Okay, all right. So so we still have low GDP per capita. Okay. So what constitutes low versus, or what's the threshold to differentiate between low and high? I just told you, right? Although that was GNI. Okay, low life expectancy. So generally, yeah, in developing economies, we lead shorter lives than in developed economies. Why? And from a sociological perspective, is because as you're richer, that means higher GDP per capita, then you can afford higher quality healthcare. You can afford higher living standards. You can afford, more comfort. Jobs that take less physical risk, that expose you to less physical harm, right? So, in developing countries, well, the opposite is true. So, generally, you got a lower life expectancy. Okay. Low literacy rates. That just means that in developing economies, they've got the percentage or the segment of the population that have low education or cannot read or write, okay, who can read or write, those are lower, okay, low literacy, okay. High population growth. Now this is an interesting one because many developing economies, that's where you see basically people making more babies, okay, and we know that people are economic agents. So you've got developing economies that have low GDP per capita, but their GDP growth rates are higher. Okay, so again, yeah, that means the size of their economy, the GDP, the measure, like Malaysia's value of GDP value is about 1.3 trillion ringgit or so, right? Although that value is smaller, because say 1.3 trillion is about 500,000 US dollars. 500 billion US dollars, but the US economy is over 20 trillion US dollars, right? So even though Malaysia's GDP is lower, but we are growing faster. Okay, so there's a difference there. Okay, know that. So remember, we measure GDP growth rate at say 3%, 4%, 5%, right? Whereas developed economies grow at 1%, maybe 2% if they're lucky, right? So the growth rate is higher in developing economies, but the overall GDP is low. Okay, so why does it have higher GDP growth rates? Well, one of the reasons is because you got high population growth. Okay. Another characteristic of developing economies is got poor infrastructure. So that means airports, roads, electricity, water supply, right? All those things. Okay. But obviously that's being tested as well, because now many developed countries, because they have not been investing in their infrastructure, so it's now developing countries like Malaysia. Believe it or not, we actually have better airports, better roads than many developed countries, better highway systems. Okay, but still generally developing countries, you got poor infrastructure. Okay, low FDI, that means foreign investors invest less in developing countries than they do in developed countries. Why? Because emerging economies, oh, by the way, developing countries, you can also call them emerging economies. Okay, I know there's a definition on page 226, right, that talks about LEDCs, less economically developed countries. Well, don't worry about that, and try not to use those terms as well. A, because it's longer, so it's harder to memorize and understand. But then B, no one really uses that. Okay, at least in the real world, they talk about developing countries or emerging economies. Okay, use those terms instead. Okay. All right. So yeah, so that's why we saw those headlines, right? Oh, they shun emerging markets, right? We see these kinds of headlines, right? We saw all these other headlines. Oh, the money is being pulled out of emerging markets. There are downgrades, defaults, all that stuff, right? They need saviors. Why? Because emerging markets are generally seen as riskier bets. Okay. What is risk? We studied this before. Them is the chance. Yeah, sure. There's a chance that it could succeed or fail, right? But that chance of failure, however you define it, is higher in emerging markets than developing countries. Okay, so that's why there's low foreign direct investment. Okay, poor healthcare. Yeah, we spoke about that. But then, you know, like I said, Malaysia's healthcare system seems to be holding up much better compared to UK, Italy, and the US. Okay, low labor productivity. Now this is still true. Okay, and it ties into a bunch of these factors because your low literacy rates. You know, you've got a lesser skilled population. So that's why when each worker in that developing country or emerging economy, right, each worker, what they produce is lower. Okay, how productive are they? It's lower compared to those in developed economies or rich countries. Okay, yeah, and now this is a problem that Malaysia faces as well. We still have quite low levels of productivity. Okay, so remember how we measure productivity? So the output, the total output, divided by the resources used. Okay, so if let's say we equalize the number of resources used, being one employee, right, working 1 man hour, right, the value of the output for that one employee working that 1 man hour in Malaysia is lower compared to that one employee who works that 1 man hour in, say, Australia or the US or, you know, Japan. Okay, so that value of the output is lower. Okay, and that's true for developing countries. Okay, and last but not least, high public debt. So in other words, because the government, public in this case means government, yeah. So because the government of that developing country or emerging economy does not have enough income, right? Either because the workers in their country make less money, so the amount of taxes they pay are lesser as well, or the value of their assets or investments are small, or just the overall value of the economy is lower, so the income that they get from taxes and what have you, they are lower. So that means they have to borrow more. Okay, so they borrow more. And if the income is lower, they're at risk of defaulting. That means defaulting means not paying their interest payments on their debt. Right? So that is another reason why they're seen as high risk. That's why you got low FDI. So that's why you got all these kinds of headlines that I showed you earlier. Okay. Okay. Let me just pause right there and take note. So, okay, let me know if you guys understand so far, or if there are any of these that you want me to go over, or any of these that spark a question in you. Again, so these are all from pages 228 to 229 if you have your textbooks. So before we proceed with the 10 minutes that we have left in class, or yeah, about 5-10 minutes left that we have in class, just tell me, make a note in the comments there, let me know if you understand all that we have gone through. So we've gone through pages 226 to 229 right now. Okay. Well, actually there are a couple more that I missed out on page. Let me see. Oh, a couple more. Let me just add those. Let me know in the comments still if you have any questions, or just make a comment saying that yes, I understand the content from pages 226 to 229. 226 to 229. Okay, if you understand, let me know. Say you understand. Okay. Hello. Jia Jin Yong. Who is Jin Yong? Is it young man? No, that's Jin Young. Who's Jin Yong? Okay, thank you. At least Jin Yong message saying that he understands. The rest of you, I'm not going to proceed. We're going to delay class. I want to try and finish through pages 232 for today's lesson. So just let me know right now whether you understand. Thank you, Sherwin. You understand. Sinru, you understand. Yasmin, you understand. Thank you. Thank you. All right. Okay. Okay, so the couple more things that I didn't mention. So this is pages. This is on page 230. Okay, so I know it's a bit small, but reliance on primary sector output. Okay, we know this already. Primary, secondary, tertiary. By primary sector, that means you're relying on natural resources a lot more. Agriculture, for example. Okay, more so than secondary and tertiary. So Malaysia moved from a very agriculture-driven economy. Right, back in the 70s, we had a lot more rubber. Then we moved up the value chain. We said, okay, look, when it comes to natural or raw rubber, we let Vietnam have it. They can plant the trees. We'll plant crops that offer higher yield. And what is it? Palm oil. So yes, I mean, we are still reliant on the primary sector, say palm oil and crude oil, but we have also moved up the value chain. So when it comes to rubber, we now produce rubber gloves. Right, we're making goods. Secondary sector, making rubber condoms. Right, so all these rubber goods, and also we moved up the value chain for palm oil as well. So we're doing a lot of processed palm oil. We built a huge refinery for oil and gas in Johor. So that's moving. It's moving up the value chain. Okay, so yeah, we're moving to higher value goods. But overall, emerging economies rely more on the primary sector, natural resources. Okay, the harvesting and processing of natural resources, as opposed to making goods. That's in the second, making finished goods. That's in the secondary sector. But of course, like I mentioned many times in class, if we are a rich country or want to be a developed country, a lot more of our GDP has to comprise of activities in the tertiary sector. Although to be fair, services make up, I want to say more than half of the Malaysian GDP. I'm almost sure. Let me just double check that. Services as a share of Malaysia GDP. Yeah, okay, so if you look at these numbers, these are from more Statista. Okay, fine, good enough. You see, right, so services account for more than half. Okay, so that's why we're getting richer. Agriculture, still around the 8% mark there. Okay, try to find another service sector. Yeah, okay, achieve 60%. Okay, so you see these. Okay, so that's why we are richer than many other emerging economies. Last but not least, corruption. Okay, generally speaking, yes, one of the characteristics of developing economies is a high level of corruption. Okay, that is kind of true. I mean, yeah, broadly it's true, but that does not mean that there is no corruption in developed countries. Okay, all right. So tell you what, let me just go through this real quick. Okay, so this is just a recap of the stuff we've gone through already. Like I said, it's repeated in chapters 20 and now also in chapter 21, which we're going through right now, and these are on pages 231 to 232. Okay, so here we go. So ways we measure standards of living. So GDP per capita, we mentioned this before. Cost of living. So now here's an interesting thing, right? So even though, say, Singapore's GDP per capita is higher, okay, but the cost of living in Singapore is also higher than in Malaysia, right? In Malaysia, for the mortgages that you pay to, say, live in a condo with a swimming pool and all that, will maybe only be enough to rent a small one small room in a public flat, or what they call HDB in Singapore, right? Because cost of living there is higher. So that's another important consideration for cost of living as well. You guys know I lived abroad for like 11, 12 years or whatever, and the cost of living in Malaysia is so low. That's why I'm so happy staying here, and my levels of disposable income is also a lot higher here, right? Because of the lower tax rates in Malaysia compared to when I lived in Australia, when I worked in the US definitely, and even New Zealand for a short while. Okay, material wealth. Okay, and still many materialistic nations or many materialistic societies. Materialistic means they really value and obsess and prioritize material wealth. Okay, how rich you are is measured by the materials, or the material goods that you have. How big your house is, how fancy your car is, how jewelry, whether you got the most expensive phones, yada yada yada. Okay, material wealth. That is a measure of standards of living. Okay, but what many people don't know is sometimes that material wealth comes at the cost of a lot of debt. So they might be taking out a lot of debt to finance that material wealth, that big house or that car, or whatever, using their credit cards to pay for these luxury items, right? Health indicators, we mentioned that already. Education indicators, we mentioned that already. And then last but not least, another standard of living or measure, another way to measure the standards of living is the social and environmental factors, right? So, many countries now, like New Zealand, Singapore, the Netherlands, especially in the Netherlands, Denmark, Scandinavian countries, and New Zealand, not so much Singapore yet, but they all place a greater emphasis, or at least a great emphasis, on the environment, right? How to make sure that they are sustainable, don't just keep using water and electricity and all these natural resources to generate electricity just at a whim, right? They are very, very conscious about that. Okay, so that's why the levels of pollution in those countries, New Zealand, Netherlands, Denmark, Singapore, is a lot lower compared to developing economies, right? Malaysia, we are still lagging behind, and a lot of that has to do with the mindset of the people, okay, when it comes to the environmental well-being, right? You guys have seen those images, right? Kuala Lumpur pollution, I can't misspell, during MCO, right? You look at all these stories, okay, right? This one came out 7 days ago, right? Cleaner waters now, breath of fresh air. This is on March 29th. Temperature has dropped, right? You're seeing all these restorative effects to KL, and of course major cities around the world as well. Why? Because of this lockdown. Blue skies. In India, they talk about people being able to see the Himalayas for the first time. Hang on, I can't really type, right? So for the first time, 5 days ago, people in India can see the Himalayas for the first time in decades. Once this loads, right? In 30 years, for the first time in almost 30 years, that's what the people are saying, okay? Right, due to India's lockdown. Okay, I know it's a bit small, but you can just Google this yourself, right? And here's a picture, right? Himalaya for the first time in decades, lockdown. So, so now the question is, with this after this lockdown is over, in many of these developing economies, can we go back to the normal where we pollute our environment, right? And what happens to our environmental indicators now that we've gotten a taste of what can happen to the environment if we just, are more environmentally friendly, right? Adopt more environmentally sustainable practices, okay? Last but not least, social, and we spoke about this as well. So this comes to factors like, what are your norms? Is it equitable? Is it very patriarchal? Is there a lot of inequality between the genders, between races? Is there adequate life chances? And do people have a lot of equity in the society? In other words, do they have a say in how that society is run? Or are they marginalized? Are they shut out or marginalized, or just being told to keep quiet, or their voice doesn't matter? Can they vote? Do they have political freedom, freedom of speech? All those things. These are the kinds of indicators, right? So many Malaysians, have moved to Australia and countries like Australia, Singapore, New Zealand. So even though the cost of living is high, but they say there are other factors. Health indicators are better there, education indicators are better there. It's more equitable in Australia and New Zealand. They can have more of a say, right? GDP per capita is higher, right? So there are all these factors that are taken into consideration. Okay, so these are some of the ways, or many ways, you can talk about your well-being. And of course, during a period such as this, a lot of what we think is being challenged, okay, when it comes to our well-being and our future life chances. So these are some of the positives of the coronavirus. But of course, we wish that we could have these lessons without the cost of the human life, and of course, a terrible cost to people's economic and financial well-being. But this is the reality we find ourselves in. All right, so I hope you guys are taking these lessons on board. All right, 1:45 now. So if you've got any questions, let me know in the comments. Otherwise, just say I understood today's lessons. Thank you very much. Bye bye. Leave that in the comments, and then you can sign off. Okay, I'll leave it on for about another minute or so. Okay. Please read in advance if you can the rest of chapter 21, relative and absolute poverty. We studied that for those of you in sociology. If not, we'll do a recap. Okay, and then we'll do supply side policies, fiscal policies, monetary policies, foreign aid, all these measures to not just manage an economy, but also improve people's life chances and make them richer. Okay, so that'll be for next week for chapter 21, and we should be done by then. All right, so just leave a note in the comments saying that you understood today's lesson. Thank you very much, Mr. Han. Bye for now, and then you can sign off, okay? Or if you have any questions, let me know in the comments. Okay, thank you, Ray. Thank you, Clarence. Thank you, Renu. Who's Jin Yong? Okay, thank you, Laiba. Thank you, Sinru. Thank you, Winning. Thank you, Cheryl. Alright, I'll leave it on for another 30 seconds. Then I'll go. Okay. Thank you, Cloud. Thank you, Sherwin. Thank you, Cheryl. Thank you, Otien. Thank you, Kunze. All right, 10 seconds. No questions. Then I'll end this broadcast. 3, 2, 1.